Welcome everybody to apparently the last POMP Seminar this semester, which I think is a pretty good culmination considering the scope of this semester's seminar dealing with Poland in the context of international relations. So not surprisingly, finally, during the final meeting we actually have security matters and well, at least by strategic matters, yes, strategic security challenges for Europe and how to deal with them, a Polish view. That's the title of the talk of our speaker today, Sławomir Dębski, and I have to say that for me this is a huge it's a huge joy, because Sławek and I actually studied at the CU in Budapest 23 years ago. We're in the same year, 93, 94. We haven't seen each other for how many years?
15, probably?
No, I think maybe...
Okay,
I think you're right. I think you're right. It was probably 15 years. He has done a lot in between, because Sławek is currently director of Polish Institute of International Affairs.
Since 2 weeks again.
Again, exactly. For the past 2 weeks. However, he's not a diplomat. He's very insistent actually on this. He's a historian. Before that, Sławek was the director of the Center for Polish-Russian Dialogue and Understanding. He has been also a member of the Polish-Russian Group for Difficult Matters since 2008. Editor-in-chief of Russian language quarterly Europa, as well as bi-weekly Polish Diplomatic Review, and in terms of his output, I mean, he has been the author of books as well as academic articles, editor of collections of documents on Polish foreign policy and history of diplomacy. His major publication, I think, is between Berlin and Moscow, German-Soviet relations, 1939-1941, which was a very well-received book, and the book also received the Clio award as well as the Eastern Review Award. And Sławek's discussant today is going to be Łukasz Kulesa, who is research director at the European Leadership Network in London. His research focuses on non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, Russian security policy, NATO, nuclear and conventional deterrence, the role of missile defense, so very, very technical stuff in a way. But Łukasz essentially is a very renowned expert who deals with security matters. He has been frequently present on TV, radio, quoted in newspapers, etc. So I think we have really two excellent speakers today. So without
if I may add,
yes.
Also a graduate of the Central European University.
Well, it's even getting
Simply
better.
theory reunion.
It's even getting better.
It's a mini reunion now.
Well, exactly. Okay, we should call director of the CU, I think, next time. Sławek, without further ado, please.
Thank you very much, Mikolaj. It's great pleasure to be here. It was, I think, 4 months ago when I accepted your invitation to be here and share my thoughts with your audience. And that time I was still a director of the Center for Polish-Russian Dialogue and Understanding, a state entity established by the Act of Parliament to enhance communication between Polish and Russian societies. Then, as you already mentioned, I was appointed by the Prime Minister, Director of Polish Institute of International Affairs, for a second time. I served this post in the years 2007-2010, and in that time, it's yet another reunion. In that time, we worked together with Łukasz, and Łukasz was the head of the research office in that time under my clock there. However, I was appointed by the Prime Minister quite recently. I would like to emphasize that I'm going to present a Polish view. It means that I'm going to speak only on behalf of myself. You are going to hear my own views. I don't know what Polish government would think about them, but generally speaking, I would try to explain how Polish governmental elite may think about security challenges for Europe. Oxford. There are only few things older than this place in Europe, and one of these is Polish strategic thinking. Let me start from the anecdote, because anecdotes usually explain well how ordinary people think. And anecdote is about Princess Wanda. She was the daughter of Prince Krak. When they lived 8th, 9th century, something like that, in Krakow. Krak was a local landowner. We would call him a oligarch in our nowadays terminology. And Krak had a great idea to establish an alliance with some Germans. And as you know, in Middle Ages, alliances were established by marriage. So Wanda was supposed to marry a German. Of course, not ordinary German, but a quite rich one, so not a big deal, not a worse deal, we can imagine. But Wanda decided to rather to jump to the water and kill herself than to marry a German prince. That's what I mean strategic thinking. Sometimes it's better to be killed than to surrender. My wife, with whom I share this anecdote, challenged me that actually the story was faked. This German had to be simply ugly-looking man, and that explains everything. The conclusion from this anecdote is that long time before World War II, which strongly overshadowed Polish-German relations, particularly between the public, the negative sentiments with the Germans had existed. And Roman Dębski, who was a founding father of the Polish modern nationalism, actually founded ideological ground for animosity between Poles and the Germans. He thought that actually, as the Germans are stronger and better organized, they are much more dangerous for the Poles as a nation than the Russians. Russians are less organized, generally. They share similar institutional culture, so they were, according to Dębski, much less dangerous. Why I'm talking about it? Because only last 25 years, it's the time when we can talk about Polish-German alliance and the Polish-German reconciliation. it's quite fresh thing. And for part of Polish society, is still quite strange notion that we are cooperating with each other and we are allies. We are allies within the EU and we are allies in NATO. We have to bear in mind this thing that we are still walking on quite fragile ground here. Having said that, we arrived to the main question of this lecture. What is the main Poland strategic concern today? Juliusz Miroszewski, one of the greatest Polish thinkers in 20th century, once said that societies living in the borderland have an ear for the sound of galloping horses of history. They know very well how it is to live on the quicksands, and that definitely the Poles have this experience of living on the quicksands. All major wars in Europe either started in the center of Europe or quickly approach this region. Many times Poles had to rebuild their own life from the scratch. I think that we may risk to say that the main strategic concerns of the Poles today is the sound of galloping horses of history, and that they are coming. For 25 years, we in Europe lived in the belief that owing to the political and economic integration founded on democratic values, rule of law, and the free market, European nations had found a formula to overcome its past divisions and conflicts. The Europe project served as a magnet to recently liberated European nations and has slowly become capable of promoting peace and security beyond its current borders. Poland, beyond any doubt, has been one of the most successful beneficiaries of the post-Cold War order. The Poles have managed to convert the time of peace into one of the most prosperous periods in the nation's history. Last 2 decades were an era of modernization, building a fast-growing economy, and self-confident society. Poland has reintegrated itself with the world system by becoming a member of institutions, bringing together the most advanced countries of the world, namely NATO and the European Union. Therefore, no one should be surprised that the Poles are more determined than other nations to defend the post-Cold War order, peaceful order in Europe. History experienced the Poles in the most toughest way. They had lost their own state twice due to the flagrant aggression of neighbors and shameful inaction of international community. This notion of being betrayed is also very deeply rooted in Polish thinking about international affairs. One of the first Polish ambassador to United States after 1989 said that our main political problem is that we cannot trust anybody. You know, the problem is that you cannot do politics without trusting to someone, at least. There is no politics without confidence that actually we can do something together. Yes, some people say that politics is about reaching deals. But still, even if we look at this from this very simplistic point of view, reaching deals is also about doing something together and negotiating common ground. So this psychological problem of trust produced by Polish historical experience may be a problem from time to time, also in the area of foreign affairs and foreign policy. Poles suffered from Germans and Russians' attempts to annihilate a nation living between them. So the Poles learned the lessons of the past, and they learned it by heart as nations living on the quicksands of European continent. Peace is not given once and forever. This message is worth sharing with the European community of democratic nations at present. Peace cannot be saved by surrendering nation after nation to the aggressor and stepping back to the threats and the blackmail. Neither peace in Europe can be saved only by a coalition of willing and able. Either we can do it together or we are lost. None by harboring an illusion that it can be saved by European nation acting not in a coalition, but separately, in the framework of national states. This thought should be regarded as the thought that actually we could be better off living alone, may be regarded as a new poison for masses. We can hear this slogan everywhere, not only in this country, but also in Poland, also in France, in Germany, in the United States. Everywhere we can hear the slogan that we could be better off acting alone, living alone, disconnected from the world. This way of thinking is diverting the attention of societies from the urgent need to take joint action and protect institutional environment that has given Europe 25 years of peace. Had Poland dealt with a strategic challenge from Russia only, one could claim that it is its classical strategic situation. But this challenge comes together with global systemic upheaval, and the time when Europe is staying at the crossroads, and the spectre of Brexit is haunting Europe. Growing political and cultural divergences within the EU hampers decision-making process. Tensions within the Eurozone undermine European Union's political coherence, introducing new political and economic dividing lines. All of that contributes to uncertainty that in worst-case scenario, European institutions would really be able to provide timely and effective shield from the threats coming from the East and South. Moreover, anti-establishment tendencies, both in Europe and the United States, additionally challenge the confidence about the outcome of would-be decision-making process, triggered out by the situation requiring taking sides on the question of security of Central Europe. For Poland, the main strategic preoccupation now is the question how to prolong the peace era in Europe that contributed so well to our and all the continent's history. Well, for 25 years, Poland's general strategic approach has been guided by the idea of harmonization of the level of development across Europe, as seen as the best guarantee and contribution to peaceful development of the whole continent. Polish political elite has been taken an inspiration again from Juliusz Miroszewski and Jerzy Giedroyć, thinking about future relations between Poles and other nations in Eastern Europe, and consequently supported this inspiration led Polish politicians to support the open door policies of European and transatlantic institutions towards Poland's eastern neighbors. This policy has been embraced by the whole Polish political spectrum, starting from the first foreign minister after 1989, Krzysztof Skubiszewski, who was responsible for signing treaties of cooperation and friendly neighborhood with all new Poland's neighbors. And you have to bear in mind that after 1989, all Poland's neighbors changed. Germany unified itself. Czechoslovakia not collapses, but split into two countries. Soviet Union split from the east into three countries: Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, and of course Kaliningrad remained as a part of Russian Federation. So actually Poland appeared in completely new geographical and political environment. All neighbors changed, and Krzysztof Skubiszewski was that politician who launched the policy of building friendly neighboring relations with all Polish new neighbors. Poland's this policy was then continued by the subsequent president, Aleksander Kwaśniewski, who was deeply involved in searching a political compromise in Ukraine in 2004 during the so-called Orange Revolution, and Lech Kaczyński, who bravely mobilized international public and political opinion in 2008 to support Georgia facing a threat of Russian aggression and even occupation. For all Poland's president and foreign ministers since 1989, the international law has always been regarded as the most important pillar of peace in Europe. So no one should be surprised that newly elected Poland's president Andrzej Duda used one of his first occasions to speak abroad. I mean, during the General Assembly of United Nations in September of last year, to confirm Poland's stance and commitment to the policy of the predecessors and international law. Today, in the light of Russia's violations of international law, grabbing and occupying territories of Ukraine, of which sovereignty and territorial integrity were guarded by both international law and seem to be solid political commitments given by nuclear powers, namely United Kingdom, United States and Russia. But also EU should be mentioned in this context, as it offered Ukraine, being under unprecedented pressure from Moscow, a helping hand and publicly made the promise that it would not be left alone once Putin decides to use economic or energy blackmail against Kyiv. Russia's recent annexation of Crimea, its constant attempt to throw Ukraine into chaos through orchestrated combination of espionage, subversion and terrorism, accompanied with sham maneuvers on international scene, aiming at sabotaging both the West's response to Moscow actions and against Ukraine, and efforts of Ukraine's authorities to re-establish order in their own country give a hint on Putin's real intentions. He rejects the world order established after the Cold War and wants to impose new code of conduct in which use of force and threat of use of force are to become acceptable political equipment and everyday life reality. We deal with the aggression of aggressive authoritarian regime based on interconnection between politics, business and crime. Ruling Russian elites, instead of providing optimal conditions for Russia to develop, to prosper, reduce the distance to the most advanced states in the world, have resorted to intimidation against neighbors through use of force and political and military blackmail. Slogans of building a new great Russia by collecting territories which were once part of the Russian Empire appeal to Russian public, as well as to the Soviet imperial tradition / nostalgia, if you want. A revisionist claim to correct, quote-unquote, history's mistakes is in a sharp contradiction to principles of cooperative security in Europe embedded in United Nations Charter and Helsinki Final Act. Here we arrive to the question of Germans. Where are the Germans here? Germany and Poland potentially can merge together in the process of shaping common US stance on Eastern Europe. I believe still such an opportunity does exist, but it could be used only with deliberate efforts, first and foremost of Germany. German idea of change through engagement, or Wandel durch Handel, turned out to be completely failure. Anyone who still holds this view suffers either from self-deception or ignorance. Russia moved back into authoritarianism despite deepening economic ties with EU and Germany. Interdependence brought more risk than opportunities. What is worse, as a matter of fact, this idealistic idea seems to be replaced by a more cynical one and contradictory. It means engagement to prevent any change. Engagement to prevent any change. Within Russia, fueled by delusion that peace and stability are dependent only on partification of current regime, and thus by offering to Putin's face-saving solutions. Yet preserving current status quo and pushing Ukraine back into post-Soviet model of underdevelopment would only make us even more vulnerable to inevitable future Russian adventurism. We cannot be blind to price tag attached to inaction, which would pave the way to de facto acceptance of such infamous terms as Russia's legitimate sphere of interest, or legitimate sovereignty or limited sovereignty of Russian neighbors. German Besserwisser approach, by ignoring strategic perspectives of countries bordering to Russia, not only undermine unity within the EU and /NATO, but also limits a room for strategic dialogue among allies, which is of key importance at the present moment of history, but also contribute badly to German-Polish cooperation in the EU and in Eastern Europe, thus invites more trouble from Russia. I have already mentioned three strategic challenges, namely aggressive authoritarian Russia, lack of unity, and a clear vision of the West how to react in a joint manner, and German-Polish disagreement regarding EU's NATO policies towards Eastern Europe. That leads me to the section of my lecture in which I would like to offer for discussion some remedies. First, Putin's Russia should be deterred and contained. Poland itself has contributed strongly, and the most from the Central Europe, to improving deterrence and the defense posture of NATO, it means also Europe, on its eastern flank. Poland would serve as a framework nation for the Very High Readiness Joint Task Force land component in 2020. Poland established NATO Force Integration Unit on its territory and also contributed to other units of this kind and offer largest part of the 20 strong reinforcement of the multinational corps northeast in Szczecin. Poland increased the obligatory level of financing national defense from 1.95% to 2% GDP, while it met the NATO recommendation of spending 20% of the budget for investment in new weaponry a few years ago. It enabled technical modernization program at 10 years long. 30 billion euro program was established to re-equip Polish armed forces with modern weapons, and it would change a lot the overall picture in Central Europe in terms of military posture. Recently, Poland moved to establish territorial defense forces and began proceedings on the legal framework allowing a swift deployment of allied reinforcement. In other words, Poland is doing what it can to enhance NATO deterrence potential, but all allies should do more in this regard. Lack of deterrence demonstrates weakness, and weakness provokes and invites trouble, not only for Poland, but also for all transatlantic community. I think one of the most important lessons of Crimea is that weakness invites trouble. Putin probably had not came to the idea of invading Ukraine if Ukraine would have been much more stronger. In September in 1939, Polish garrison in Westerplatte was 167 men strong, and they were fighting 7 days. In Crimea we had 15,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and no single shot was fired. I think the situation between Ukraine and Poland, Ukrainians and Poles, is completely different. Remember Wanda. Remember Wanda. It's better to die than surrender. Sometimes this notion produced harm and troubles for Poles and for Poland. All these uprisings against Russia and then against Germany may be viewed also as a consequence of this poisoning idea, better die than surrender. But also it is a kind of the contribution to the deterrence. We are not going to give up, and Poland and the Poles, and I'm sure about that, would fight. Yet another anecdote. Yeah. It was 2014, so during the the hottest moment in Russian-Ukrainian war. My neighbors who came to me, asking whether war is coming. They said, "We are dealing with international affairs. You should know what's going on." They are ordinary people. He's working in as a lawyer. She is a doctor. Usually they don't pay much attention into international politics. But in 2014, they knocked my door asking a question: the war is coming, and what should we do? This give me a real touch to the emotions of people living in at the quicksand of Europe. They know that one day it may happen.
What was your reply?
Well, my reply was that yes, the situation is difficult, but they should relax.
So you were a diplomat after all.
Yes. Why we have to deter Russia? Why we have to enhance our posture, military posture in eastern flank of NATO, and that's very important explanation I would like to share with you. Because we don't want to find ourselves in a war with Russia. Deterrence is about preventing war. We know how this war may look like, so we don't want it. Containment of Russia is, however, not enough. We should avoid a surge of anti-Russian sentiments in the West. The democratic world is not an enemy of neither Russia nor the Russians. Our adversary is Putinism. So a clear message must be issued that we oppose actions of Putin's authoritarian regime and its supporters. We must strive to reach out of those Russians who think likewise. Deterrence is not about deterring the Russians. I mean, the public, the nation. It should be directed to a very particular decision-making elite and their possible way of thinking. Okay. Third, the way in which we impose sanctions against Putin regime should be reconsidered and changed, in my view. Economic sanctions are actually the last line of EU defense as serious international actor. They are not as much important as a tool to punish Russia, though inflicting pain on aggressor is a must, but as a confirmation that we, the EU, are able to translate common diagnosis into common action. Preserving unity when it comes to sanctions and their direct relations to illegal annexation of Crimea is absolutely necessary. However, new measures should be introduced not if Putin makes another step in the wrong direction, but when he shows no intention to withdraw from the previous one. The logic behind the sanctions should be reverted. The West shall not give away to its painstakingly achieved credibility, its values and rule of law for the sake of economic interdependence with Russia. If doing business with Russia compromises increasingly economic and security risk, democratic governments should refuse to support it. Fourth, Ukraine should be supported in building a modern, democratic and prosperous country. You must keep in mind what brought these people, I mean Ukrainians, to the street in Kiev and other cities of Ukraine. They sought to change the governance of the country. When united and sticking to its commitment and principles, Alliance of Democratic Countries is capable of defending itself against power threats. More than ever, only transatlantic unity and political determination will guarantee that grand vision of Europe free and at peace become true one day with democratic Russia as its part. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to hearing your comments, questions and challenging opinion. Thank you very much.
Well done, Sławomir. Łukasz.
Thank you very much, and let me start with thanking you for the invitation, which turned out to be a reunion of sorts. And of course, I won't comment or pose additional questions to every aspect of Sławomir's very rich lecture. But no, let me also start with Wanda and with Krak. Because I started thinking about it, and I think I draw a slightly different conclusions than you are, because it seems to me not exactly a good strategic thinking, but actually evasion or avoidance of strategic choices, because the choices seem to be you either marry the German prince and hence ally yourself with Germany, then the choice might be you go and fight the Germans. There are also other choices. You might reach out to a quite handsome Russian prince or quite interesting Czech king. So just throwing yourself into a river and probably dying of pollution seems to me avoidance of strategic choices. Unfortunately, we see such avoidance of strategic choices not necessarily in Poland, because in a number of cases, as we've seen, there are strong opinions on, especially on Russia and on the East. But I see this avoidance of strategic choices in a number of countries in Europe. And you mentioned it with regards to Germany, a couple of other main players, that it seems that the problems are too complex or too time-consuming or regards too much efforts and financial sources, so we simply try to avoid them. I think the term is kicking the can down the road. We've seen it with regards to Russia a little bit. We've seen it certainly with regards to the migration crisis. We've seen it also with regards to a thing that you don't mention, but I think is important, the growing emergence of weak states, failing states, and frankly speaking, ungoverned spaces. Some of the weak states are to the east of us. Some of the ungoverned spaces are to the south of us. And it seems to me that we left places like Libya, Syria to their own, thinking that somehow they will fix themselves. And they didn't. On the contrary, they are getting worse. So we should not probably follow Wanda's lead on avoiding the strategic choices, but make a choice this way or another. Then I think you very rightly mentioned the idea of the confidence and of the trust and a lack of trust, and especially in the Polish strategic debate, I think some ghosts from the past, I would call them, are resurfacing regarding, of course, our relations with Russia, but also regarding our relations with Germany. And we, for 25 years, thought that we left certain things behind us, and we would live more or less. We might have differences of opinion, but we wouldn't necessarily go back into history. But the history is drawing us back into this quicksand of sometimes misunderstandings and mistrust. Then the issue of being in the borderland. This is, again, I would like to completely agree and emphasize that this is one of the major issues, not only for the Poles, but also for Estonians, Lithuanians, Romanians, to some extent also our friends further to the north. The idea that you can be a good European pupil, you can be a nice, decent Central European country, and then almost overnight you are pushed, or you pushed yourself, into Eastern Europe. This strange area in which there are ancient hatreds, in which there are some ethnic, religious, other problems. So the area in which the proper Western Europeans don't really want to know too much. So it's interesting that it took us 20 years to get to Central Europe, but now we're seeing us being pushed towards Eastern Europe. A question that you may choose to reply or not to is to what extent our action or the actions of the people in Warsaw are drawing ourselves back to Eastern Europe. The next thing, the better alone team, and you might be familiar with a comment by Ulrich Speck in The Guardian, I think this week or last week, in which he made this distinction between the territorialists, so the people who really think that we are better alone and the borders are there to shield us from everything that's bad, and between the people he called globalists, who think that we still have a common stake in cooperation across the border in the EU context, but also on the broader context. And then, if Poland thinks that better alone is not a good policy, that we should try to avoid this renationalization of the foreign and security and also economic relations, then I think a strong voice from Warsaw, not only from you but also from other places in Warsaw, that would be good in terms of saying that we have still a stake in cooperation. That still cooperation is the preferred way forward. On Russia, I think I agree with 95% of what you said, and this is very important.
Good.
that we don't go back.
Give me this fine.
It's coming. 95%, especially the notion that we should not kind of gradually, almost invisibly, go back to business as usual. Putin is not moving, but we're moving closely towards his position in this hope that we can try and get a modus vivendi with Russia, which would basically means that we are capitulating to the Russian position. So everything you mentioned, deterrence, containment, which is not a passive strategy but an active containment. Also, the idea of supporting Ukraine as much as possible. This is very much on the agenda. The 5%, I'm not sure about further strengthening of sanctions if things don't move, because I believe we would be in a very, very lonely place in the European Union if we start to advocate for this kind of policy. There are a number of countries that basically are waiting for the sanctions to be lifted, and certainly not wanting to the sanctions to move further. And then basic issues with Russia. How does it end? You are a renowned expert on Russia. You were dealing with it for many years. So the question is, how do we go? What's the end state? Is the end state the end of Putinism caused by our pressure? Is the end state a situation in which the Russian regime, including President Putin himself, changes the policy quite significantly to make sure that he goes back and Russia goes back to the previous European security order. Are we seeking revolution? Are we seeking evolution? Or do we simply want to make a stand, also based on the normative beliefs? So with this couple of comments and I'm afraid new questions brought to the table, let me leave it like this.
Good, very good.